All right. Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September 25th. I am Aaron Krickenberger, your host for today's Kubernetes SIG Testing weekly meeting. This is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube for all to see forever and ever. So please keep in mind that we have a code of conduct. On today's agenda, we're going to have Steve talk to us a little bit about using Bazel for image builds. And then Timothy St. Clair had a couple topics to discuss around Kubernetes conformance and refactoring the E2E framework. And then I wanted to chat real quickly about the SIG testing stand-up meetings. With that, I will turn it over to Steve.
Thanks. It's kind of just a small comment. Catherine, you were reworking the deck build to use Bazel. I think like that direction makes a huge amount of sense and is super useful, especially because it's pulling together so many different languages. I'm gonna close this door one sec. But I think the biggest thing do we have like a one-stop button push that we can use to do all of the image builds downstream using Bazel today, since they're Docker files, like, I don't know, I guess just making that change means that if OpenShift wants to continue using like latest PROW, we need to re-architect how we're doing all of our image builds. That's a pretty big shift. So if you guys can spare a little bit of time to help us, then I'm okay with those changes completely.
I can help with that. I mean, we, for the most part, use Bazel for all of our images. So it should be, you know, especially if you are able to get Bazel somewhere in your toolchain, that should work pretty well. But yeah, we should talk about that. Or if somebody else wants to help, I am happy to defer. I don't know, Catherine, are you interested in?
So just to help me like set some context here, are we talking about like we would like to have a canonical way to build all of the PROW images in the testing for repo? And we're trying to decide if that way should be Bazel?
Yes.
We have both right now. We're trying to add some more tools to how we build deck. And Catherine has something working that manages everything through Bazel. It's a little bit more interesting to do it without that.
Yeah, like I know we have talked about making Bazel a canonical build tool for repos in the past, and test infra is absolutely a place where it makes sense because Bazel deals better than Bash and Make with dependencies across languages and stuff. So I think it totally makes sense here. I don't know if it blows scope to discuss the idea that like we build many more images out of the test infra repo than just the PROW components. So it might be worth looking at PROW as the the experiment to see if this works well for OpenShift, since they're an extensive consumer of that. But like I was just working on fixing triage today and yesterday, and that's still something I have to manually build on my laptop. I would love to figure out how we could ultimately live in a world where pushing code to the repo results in images getting pushed and built.
I mean, so that's the next thing is ideally, like consumers like OpenShift shouldn't need to build like the deck image. We now have things like the branding actually done through config. It should be possible to just have canonical images that are published to a repo.
We still want to make it easy for people to publish their own images though, for a bunch of other reasons, right?
Why?
I mean, like Istio has a fork right now. Obviously, we should avoid forks whenever possible.
I mean, so they have a fork right now because they're running old code. We should unfork them. They should get
No, they have a fork because they're running code that we've chosen not to merge.
So I think something that happened historically was that initially our PROW images were non-public. So everybody who wanted to use PROW had to produce their own images. I think one thing that might be useful would be for us to, you know, the SIG testing team on a weekly or whatever basis sort of push out like a, you know, official maybe SemVer type version of PROW or something that's like tagged and then is available for people to use if they want. But I also do agree with PROW that, or I mean, sorry, I do agree with Cole that there, we shouldn't make it too, you know, onerous for someone who, for whatever reason, wants to have, you know, provenance over their own builds.
Right.
Like I think that needs to be something that people should, for open source, they should be able to build it themselves.
Right. I'm not saying we should make it harder for them to build. I'm saying we should make it easier for people to not have to build, because a lot of the consumers we should be getting to a point where like the binaries work without modifying them, and we should just like auto push builds on commit.
Yeah, it's not as much that we have any changes that we hold on top of. I don't think. I mean, maybe some of the branding stuff. I don't know.
You used to have to for the style sheet and for like the branding.
Yeah, for those small things. But also like when I'm doing experimental pushes, and if I notice, like I don't know, there was a bunch of points where like we merged some like really awesome tide improvements that also happened to be totally broken, and it was nice for me to test things quote unquote in production and build my own images and hold little commits here and there. Yeah. So as like a downstream consumer, if we just want someone to run Proud, totally agree. If we provide them the images and they just use them, that's perfect. For me specifically, I think it would be nice to,
Oh yeah, no, I just want to add that like right now, we do publish images and people are expected to use those if they're not trying to customize the like build, but we don't push them for like every commit. It's just kind of whenever we decide to bump.
Right.
We should automate that away. So like if there's a Proud commit, there's an image.
Yeah, and I mean like the other interesting thing here is so like a Docker file as the currency of container image building. Like obviously there's massive drawbacks to like that approach, but like it is an accepted standard. There are a million ways to use it. It's interoperable. Like OpenShift as a system supports like my fork of test infra. When a new commit gets pushed to there, I automatically get image rebuilds. They're scheduled onto my cluster the same way they normally would. Like that entire flow already happens for me because we're using Docker files as that currency. If we move away from that, I'm not like super bummed about it, but like.
You also still have to build the other components that the Docker file consumes, right?
Yeah.
And none of that is through any particularly standard anything right now.
Yeah.
I've also found for like more complicated builds that, like Docker files are pretty standard, but they can be
a total hassle and extremely frustrating to use.
When you want, and in some cases you can't.
Yeah. No, I really see the use of Bazel here. Like I think it's super, super useful, especially when we're doing this like multi-language thing. I just want to make sure it's not onerous to do, especially when today it's super, super simple.
Yeah, I think so we have like a target that does all the images now, I think. I think you should just need like, if you can get the correct Bazel version in the toolchain, you just call that target and it will like do the rest.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should try it out and, report back in a couple weeks to see what is okay and what, isn't as promised.
I agree. So then my tactical question is on the issue of collaboration. Steve, if you're about to go to a different time zone for the next month, what's the most expedient way for us to make sure that we are offering OpenShift the level of support they require for Bazel builds, making sure that it works?
Well, also, if we don't find any bugs in Prow, and OpenShift just stays in the same version for the next month, like no one's gonna cry, Okay. So let's take an action item to like come back later if we really need to, but otherwise, like I think a month should be fine.
And if there is someone else you want to point us towards, like that would also work.
Unfortunately, the reason I'm going to be in Europe is because the rest of the team is there.
Right.
So, but cool. That sounds good. Yeah. So let's just like see how it works. As long as it's like not, because I'm going to be honest, I don't understand Bazel like to any extent, as noticed by like my comments today in the SIG testing chat. So it just seems it's scary. So if we can make it less scary, if we can make it easy, like I'm totally for it.
The hope is that it should be less scary than having to like also instrument building with like Node and Yarn and.
Yeah.
They're arguably.
What could possibly go wrong with NPM?
Yeah.
So
I'm just trying to understand from a pragmatic perspective, are we saying that we're going to be making changes that won't end up landing in make files and Docker files? Do we want to just comment about that someplace? Do we want to remove those files so that there is only one thing? And if we decide this isn't working well and we need to revert or we need to go back to Docker files and make files, we'll revisit that a month from now.
We definitely need to put something in the Prow announcements, and we should probably remove it. I don't think it's a good idea to have one around that's like not fully functional.
I agree.
If you use the one in for deck today with my PR, then the result you get is completely non-functional. So leaving it around is
Let's remove all the Docker files.
Okay, cool. All right, I will mute so my mechanical keyboard note-taking doesn't fill everybody's ears. Tim, you are up next.
So we talked about this a while ago about the kubectl container contains a bunch of other details and information that's germane to only pretty much test infra. And we wanted to get a canonical version of the conformance tests in upstream because we Heftio maintained it for a period of time, but it makes no sense for us to do that. And people want to have it on a per PR basis for them to be able to evaluate. So we just want to get that pushed up as part of the release jiggery. Is there any questions, comments, complaints, concerns about having that as a separable container aside from kubekins itself?
So what all do we expect to be in this? I assume like Ginkgo, the E2E test, or E2E.test binary. Is there anything else in there?
Ideally, the other tests like node conformance suite might be useful for folks who want to have a way of validating their cluster deployments. So you'd probably have the end-to-end test suite obviously needs to be there. The node end-to-end test suite is useful as a precursor to evaluate if their installs are sane. And we do have some wrapper scripts for how we execute. And I do need to make some changes to the end-to-end test suite in order for it to play nicer on some deployment environments. But that's pretty much it. So it's basically a set of script wrappers for execution. So that way we can clean up nicer on environments where, you know, it's not just running the end-to-end test suite.
Okay.
Now, are you expecting this to be forward-looking, where like once we enable this, commits, you know, from that commit forward, or are you hoping this gets backported into like, you know, previous versions that are supported?
I don't think it's necessary to backport it at this point because we already have existing tooling that people can reference and it's pinned for those versions. I think it's just a forward-looking thing. Now we could if people wanted it, but it's not a requirement from my side.
I would just add that we should make sure that we, if not literally running those images, that we like run the suites in an identical configuration in the CI. Yeah. So make sure that like if we're publishing this as official, like we have some validation.
Yes, I agree. Go ahead.
Do all the tests that have cloud provider specific functionality, do they do all of the what's the word? Like if I remember correctly, there were a couple where you needed to pass in specifics about the cloud provider you were using and the way that it was provisioned to have the test run appropriately?
Yes.
So is this container going to do discovery of that by itself, or is this still going to expect that information? So
that's a conundrum of the end-to-end test suites itself. That's part of what, forgot the guy's name, Philip, I think it is. Part of Philip's changes relates to that, but I'm not keen on some of those changes that are going in there. Ideally, it should be auto-discoverable.
I can tell you that one very recent change that isn't auto-discoverable, and I don't think it's easy to auto-discover. So some of these things should just move out anyhow, like we're trying to get cloud provider stuff out. But in the meantime, there's at least one GCP storage thing where if it doesn't have this like supplied service account key, it's going to generate one. And we really need the E2E test not to be generating a service account key file for every time they run. we get alerts when a key is created for obvious reasons. So instead, there is a magical environment variable that informs it that we've pre-provisioned a key for it. I don't think there's a really good way to discover that. It needs to be specific to when you're running an E2E test and you've intentionally provided this key.
So to be honest, like there, with the work that Lucas has been doing for component configuration, there's no real reason in the long haul it couldn't be totally introspective, right?
Oh, yeah.
We should be able to grab the config maps for the component configs for the different components and instantaneously detect what provider is there and what features have been enabled.
In the very long term, all of the storage providers and all the cloud providers are moving out as well. Hopefully we will be testing that storage provider with some other tooling out of tree anyhow. I mean, it'll probably be the same thing, but it won't literally be that E2E image.
Yeah.
But in the shorter term, we still need ways to like plumb through stuff like that.
It is still plumbed through, and his PR actually makes it even a little bit worse. So I have to go talk with him about some of the changes that were there, because it kind of builds it in.
Hey Tim, is there a document that sort of shows what the interface of the image is that is currently used, so that we can make sure the new one does the same thing? And I assume what you want is a published image, right? Because we already do publish the E binaries as like a tarball, but I assume you want something that someone can just cube control apply or whatever, and it'll run conformance tests.
Yes. So I will PR what we currently have, and then I will also make some minor modifications to it, and then open an issue with regards to the other details. I'll do both. Okay,
cool. Yeah, I mean, I think this would be part of the Kubernetes build job that runs after each merge, that produces the tarball would then also maybe package up the. Oh, and now are you thinking of this living in Kubernetes or the test info repo?
Kubernetes, KK.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that all sounds good to me.
The other next topic was the end-to-end test refactoring in order for be able to import it, because I don't know if anybody else besides me has, I know Steve has, but OpenShift kind of eats the whole test suite. Clayton's modifications is like nom, your tests are delicious. But the problem with that approach is that you can't import the framework cleanly. You have to do a bunch of hacks because of staging and all the other stuff that comes along with it. So there's no way anyone can import a framework and try to run tests. And part of the work that I believe Philip was trying to do was to disentangle some of that stuff and to get a depth graph, which is a little more sane-ish. The problem with his PR is that it is large and conflating a bit. I'd like to separate out pieces one at a time, and he's in a different time zone. So if other folks interface with him and talk with him on these details, that some of the having atomic, and we mentioned it previously in another call, is having atomic discrete changes one at a time, because the way his PR is structured currently it's too large to in one PR to change without the ramifications percolate to everybody, right?
I was under the impression he had pushed that large PR forward to make sure he was heading in the right direction, but I agree it needs to be broken down into smaller commits for reviewer consumption. With your mention of staging and a sane depth graph, I'm wondering, is the goal here to make sure that the framework is something that lives out of tree, or would it still live inside of KK? And then would it?
I don't think in all honesty anything's going to live out of KK in the near term future, even in the medium term future. I know people they push it into staging, and I think staging is an appropriate location for it eventually, but I don't see it actually getting out of tree.
Yeah, it seems like staging has ended up being the accepted solution for breaking up KK into multiple repos, that once something lands in staging, that is good enough for people. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that appears to be that appears to be the state of the world. So
Stefan's
I'm
still
just trying to
dreams of
figure,
a world where that doesn't happen.
but I'm just trying to figure out if we're talking about making this framework such that it would depend upon the published repos with the depth graph, or what?
Yeah,
Publish should be
everything will
fine,
be.
right? Because all we needed is to import it. And not only for OpenShift, but I think a lot of the Kubernetes incubator projects are having similar issues.
Yes. Yeah, it just import cycle of doom, right? The problem is it depends upon, it's like picking up like one strand of a yarn ball and it picks up the whole yarn ball. Right? So that's just the problem with some of the internal code, and disentangling it is a non-trivial work. So I applaud him for his efforts. I just think that in order for us to take some of those efforts, we need to break down the problem a little more discreetly and talk about each topic at a time, namely like what Steve was talking about earlier. The cloud provider integration into the end-to-end test suites is kind of a little bit of weird thorniness. And some of the changes that he made with there was actually he integrated the cloud providers directly into the tests. That's actually the opposite direction that we kind of want to go in the long haul.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of work with JetSec and their Cert Manager project recently, and they tried pretty hard to mimic all this stuff. And looking at how they do testing, they've basically mimicked everything, but wound up rewriting like the framework, because you can't actually import it. You wind up, okay, we'll use Ginkgo and we'll build an e2e.test, but we'll actually have to like write our own framework package, and like it winds up being kind of the same thing, but not really. I think it'd be really good if we could get all of the kind of like Kubernetes ecosystem projects using more or less the same tooling for this. And right now it's not really feasible.
Yeah, there's other refactorings that need to occur in the test suite. There was one PR that recently came in, or one issue that recently came in, that we should probably add to the conformance test requirements, is like you shouldn't need SSH keys into the actual images themselves, right?
Except that's how we gather logs for most of the tests, but yeah.
I mean, we should look into options there. I've been looking at too, like we probably want to promote more stuff to conformance, and I've been looking at, well, what do the end-to-end tests typically require? And it's kind of all over the place, from binaries on the host to like using nsenter and running sudo on the host. Like, we might want to even revisit kind of standards for what we expect end-to-end tests to do. Otherwise, we're just going to have a lot of tests that we can never promote because they fundamentally have untenable requirements.
So part of my concern here is, I guess what I'm hearing from you, Tim, is you're asking for more reviewers for more review bandwidth here. And like, I can't necessarily speak for everybody on this call, but it's like, this is not on my roadmap for the next quarter. In terms of like this upcoming, the 1.13 release being a stabilization release, I would love to see this refactor happen, but there's only but so much bandwidth I can contribute to it as a priority. Like, I'm kind of more interested as a consumer of the tests run by this framework. How can I make them look more meaningful and such?
I can provide some bandwidth. I think we have a couple teams, especially in the incubator repos, that are hitting this really hard, and it's making their life pretty miserable. So, Tim, if you want to shoot me some PRs, I can try to get some eyes on it. I know Clayton's been really frustrated with the lack of a standalone testing that auto resolves input as well.
Because like, it appears to me, for better or for worse, the reality of today is there is no real single owner for the E2E framework code base. So like, I can't go tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, could you please come back over here and take over ownership of this code base? We're all big fans of the code base getting made better, but I'm not sure specifically what you're asking for and how we can help.
If you see him and he's doing things, just gently remind him that atomic commits are useful, and if there's other PRs that come in, you can feel free to direct them towards me, or I don't know if Jeff was one of the original people that had helped write some of the framework stuff along with me and Rob and Jay and other folks. But the framework has taken on this weird life of its own in absentia, with a bunch of people kind of duct taping pieces on instead of actually having an owner over the long haul, like you mentioned.
I agree completely. I think one specific facet of the framework I've been trying to untangle lately is around upgrade tests. And I know there's been this ongoing theme that SIG cluster lifecycle doesn't own any of the contents of the cluster directory and the bash scripts therein, but there are a whole bunch of tests that are tagged as like feature master upgrade, feature cluster upgrade, and whatnot that are part of the E2E framework thing. And I think like we can offer a little bit of help there if you're incentivized to like clean that section up. Because I'm trying to make sure that still hooks into something that's kubeadm based, since that is more actively supported by SIG cluster lifecycle. You're muted.
There already exists kubeadm tests for all this. So the kubeadm has its own lifecycle set of tests that are independent of those. Those are specifically for GCP and GKE. So
but I think like those are about making sure that as an upgrade is actively in progress, that there are still like that workloads still happen and are satisfied.
We're losing our room here in Sunnyvale. Sorry to interject.
Yeah. So we can take this, I think we can file an issue and like, but we can shop it around SIG cluster lifecycle, but I don't think there's anyone, at least that I'm aware of, that wants to own that stuff. We're having troubles owning the testing infrastructure we currently have.
Sure. Like, yeah, to be clear, this isn't about owning the cluster directory, right? This is just like all of the features that actually drive cluster upgrades and stuff. Because it was kind of unclear to me whether or not kubeadm made use of that stuff or not. Hooray. Okay. So yeah, we are more or less at time. I did just want to give anybody who has any strong objections on us dropping our SIG testing meetings in favor of increased breakouts a chance to speak up here. I know I've heard from Steve, who's probably been the most active attendee out of this group, which I totally see and hear and comprehend the thumbs down. But I think like breakouts would be ideal.
Aaron, can we instead have a daily 3-hour meeting, just you and me?
Sure.
You have time, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I have it blocked off right now. So sounds great, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy 3-hour daily meetings. See you later.